how do you know what value will work for the scene? How do you know when the exposure is right? Since we need to imitate white neutral lights, we switch to direct input. And now we need to direct the sunlight inside the interior to imitate the lighting in the reference. This method makes the render faster than if we use white environment light. Hi everyone, it's Render.courses, and today we're gonna set up lighting for this scene. And so we're gonna use two renders, Corona Render and Vray. You can use whichever render you like best. And in this video, we'll start in Corona and then we'll switch to Vray. So you will see that it doesn't really matter what rendering software you're using. The main thing is to know what to do with it. So our reference image has neutral daylighting. There is no bright light, no bright sunlight. This made me choose the lighting technique called white synthetic. This is when we have white fill light coming from the window. So let's start with Corona Render. Of course, you need to have Corona Render installed on your computer. So we press F10 to open the Render Setup window. And so then we select Corona from the list of renderers. Next, we go to the Scene tab, and we need to fill the scene with identical clay material because we don't want to be distracted by the incorrect colors of the objects, seeing that we haven't yet assigned the materials. So we check MTL override, then click None and select Corona Physical MTL from the list. It's a basic gray material. So next we click Start Interactive, and the frame buffer window comes up. Yet nothing is happening because we haven't set up lighting yet. Next we switch to single map. We can do that. And here we have a basic white material. See? The light starts coming from the window. So let's switch off automatic denoise so that the image doesn't look too sterile. So we click the Performance tab and uncheck Fast Preview Denoise. This is how the interactive render works. Next we need to set up brightness or exposition. This is done on the Tone Mapping tab. And we need to change this parameter, this simple exposure. So how do you know what value will work for the scene? How do you know when the exposure is right? So let's take a look at our reference image, and we can see right away that it's pretty contrasting. It must have been heavily edited in Photoshop, so that's why we won't be using it as a reference for brightness. The best reference for us is the clay material that we use to fill up our scene. So let's open Material Editor and see what the basic Corona Physical MTL looks like. We drag it here, click here, and select Open Preview Window. And this ball has a neutral gray color. The brightness in our scene needs to match this ball. So let's go ahead and increase the simple exposure value to, let's say, to 4. And we see that our image has become brighter and it almost matches the ball. So these highlighted spots on the ceiling and the shadows almost match the ball. So 4 works just fine, I think, and now we just need to add a background outside the window. And you might think that the background can be edited later in Photoshop, and I agree, but a plane with a background photo should look better. Plus, after we assign the materials, the background will be reflected in some of the objects, making the scene look more realistic. Okay, now let's set up the background. And I'm gonna add another viewport. Click this button and select the 2 viewport layout. See, frame buffer switched, and we need to get it back now. In either viewport, I press C and switch to Corona camera. And now we need to fix this camera. So we go to Render Setup and click this lock icon. And now, when we're switching between 2 viewports, our interactive render will stay in place. In the other viewport, we switch to front view. Then we click Create, Plane, and you can see that the plane is blocking the camera view. So let's go ahead and move the plane outside the interior. Also, the plane has its backside to the camera. We need to rotate it by 180 degrees. All right, now let's work with materials. Open Material Editor, select Corona Light MTL, and drag it here. Next, we need to pick up a texture, and I've prepared some background images that look similar to the background in the reference photo. All the links to these images will be in the description under this video, so let's pick this texture, for example, and drag it over to Material Editor and also link it to color. All right, so now we need to assign this material to our plane. We select the plane, then select the material, and click Assign Material to Selection. Nothing is changed because clay material fills our background as well. So let's go to Render Setup, into the scene, and click Preserve and check Preserve Light Material. All right, light material has been excluded from clay material override. But we see that our render is now filled with this greenish sort of color because this material affects lighting as well. So in order to avoid this, we need to uncheck Emit Light, and this will make it look much better. I think we should reduce background brightness a little bit, and I think they lowered background brightness in the reference image, so we should also do that. So let's set intensity to 0.5. And next, we need to adjust position of the background image so that it looks nice. We don't want to have too many of these dark spots. That will work, I would say. So now let's take a look at our reference. And here you can see deep shadows from the vases and chairs. Plus, foreground lighting is more intense here than in our render. And that means that we need an extra source of light to illuminate this area in the foreground. So let's use Corona Sun. So let's head over to Create, go to Lights, and from the drop-down list, select Corona, and from the drop-down list, select Corona, then Corona Sun, and add it in one of the viewports. Let's put the sun slightly at an angle. And next, we set default values, intensity to 1, and size also 1. And as a result, we have a very bright, harsh kind of lighting. So let's set up our Corona Sun. So we increase size to 32. 64 is the maximum. The light has become softer. So the bigger the light source, the softer the shadows. All right, next we reduce intensity to 0.1. That's too bright. Let's change it to 0.05. Still too bright. Let's reduce it further. All right, that will work. Okay, so it's not as burned out as it used to be, but it's still sort of orangey. So since we need to imitate white neutral lights, we switch to direct input. And now we need to direct the sunlight inside the interior to imitate the lighting in the reference. So the shadows here have shifted to the left. In the reference, the shadows point at us. So we'll need to move the sun to the side so that the shadows match the reference. All right, let's compare our scene against the reference. Looks okay. Now let's save this test render so that we can use it as a reference when we're working in Vray. Okay, so let's save it. And then hit Render, Folder, and save render JPEG as Corona Clay Test. Now, of course, we can't possibly cover all lighting schemes in this lesson. There's a lot of them. There's bright daylight, night light, evening light, artificial light. So if you're willing to learn more about visualization, you can sign up for our comprehensive training course. Hundreds of students have already completed our program and learn how to create amazing renders that you see on the screen right now. So this is the kind of result they've managed to achieve in just 1 month. So that's pretty astonishing. All right, let's go back to our scene. So we're gonna work in Vray, and we're gonna need the background plane. So I'll leave it here. And we're gonna do the same things in Vray and achieve the same result. I won't create the plane in Vray all over again though, because it's done exactly like in Corona. Okay, so let's begin. First of all, we remove the sun because we don't need it anymore. We close the interactive render. Now we need to open Vray. And of course you need to have Vray installed on your computer. We click Render Setup and select Vray from the list. I have Vray 6 here. And we'll leave all default settings as they are. View to render is locked to Corona camera. It doesn't matter what camera you're gonna use. It works the same way in Vray as in Corona render. And you can also use a standard camera or a physical camera. On the Vray tab, we click Start IPR. This is the interactive render in Vray. You can see that lighting here is not set. Lighting here is set like in Corona, yet with some minor differences. First, we need to fill the render with clay material. This is how we do this. We go to global switches. Some of the settings are unavailable. We click default and open advanced settings. Next, check MTL override, then click none and select Vray MTL from the list. Its default color is also gray, just like in Corona. The render is dark because there's no light yet. In Corona, we checked this GI environment box. And by the way, our interactive render hasn't updated. The override command didn't work. Now we need to stop the render and start the interactive render once again. Okay, now it's better. So here we have environment light, and I think it's best to position a light source right in the window. I've been doing tests and comparing different options. And of course, white environment light will work as well, but your render will take longer compared to the method that I'm about to show you. Okay, now we need to create a light source here in the window. So we go ahead and click create, lights, Vray light. Light type is plain. We press S key to enable 3D snaps and create a plane the size of the window. And now we put it inside our interior, but still close to the window. Make sure your light source doesn't interfere with your geometry. Now there's too much light in the interactive render. Let's set up our light source. So we go to Modify tab and set multiplier to 1. There's light in the scene, but we can't see the frame because our light source is visible. To correct this, we need to check the invisible box. Alright, render has started. Now let's go to Render Setup. We don't want any white fill light, so we uncheck GI environment. This method makes the render faster than if we use white environment light. Now, be sure to add this method to your arsenal. It's very useful. So next we need to set up our background plane, and you can see these highlight burns on the floor and ceiling. We need to get rid of them. So in Corona, we did that by adjusting exposure. In Vray, exposure is set in a similar way. We click Create Layer and select Exposure from the list. Here we can see exposure and highlight burn. We set highlight burn to the minimum. And now the burns are gone. So next, let's add a light source. To imitate brightness light falling on the floor and table. It's done pretty much the same way. So we go to Create, Vray Lights, Vray Sun, and we direct the sun inside the interior. Vray suggests adding Vray Sky as well, but we say no, because our scene uses white synthetic light. Now we need to position the sun so that it looks down from above. It should look at the floor. Alright, done. The sun also is bright and harsh, and we need to set it up like we did in Corona. We'll go to the Modify tab, and let's lower intensity to 0.04. Actually, let's make it 0.01. The light coming from the sun is orange. We select Override as color mode. Now the scene will have white light. Next we increase size to 32 to blur the light. And it's all done in the same way. We're going to make the light come deeper into the interior and at the same angle as we used before to create the right shadows. Something like this. And so lastly, we need to set up a nice kind of background. And it's done the same way. In Material Editor, select Vray Light MTL from the list here. It's all very similar to Corona, as you can see. So we add a texture, or we could have used this one. And we'll link the texture to light color. Now we need to assign this material to the background plane. Select the plane, select the material, and click Assign, and nothing happened because the render is filled with clay material. So let's head over to Render Setup. Select Global Switches here, and click Exclude and select our background from the list. Okay, what was the name? Let's rename it from Plane to Background. Okay, and now we click Exclude, select Background and add it to the Exclude list. And restart the render. See? Now we have a nice background. So this is how we set up lighting in V-Ray. It's no rocket science. The only difference is that in Corona, we used white fill light, and here in V-Ray, we placed a light source inside the interior. But again, it's the way I do it. Feel free to use white light, but in that case, your render will twice or even thrice as much time. There's one more thing I'd like to draw your attention to. The plane may cast a shadow inside the interior. Now, Corona removes such shadows automatically, but in V-Ray, you need to do it manually. That's why you need to exclude the plane from the sun. Select the sun, click Exclude, and add our background to the list. Now the scene is getting more light because the background isn't casting a shadow inside the interior anymore. And so lastly, one more thing I'd like to mention is that the background might add a certain shade to the interior. So to avoid it, in Corona, we unchecked Emit Light. In V-Ray, we do it differently. We select the plane and do a right mouse click on it, select V-Ray properties and uncheck Generate GI. See? Image looks cleaner, the greenish shade is gone, plus it renders fast. So that's it for today. In the next lessons, we're gonna work with materials in Corona and V-Ray. We'll see you then. Bye.